It's complete nonsense. It is complete nonsense. I spoke to parents of young men who had lost their lives in Afghanistan, and I think it is a disgrace to denigrate their memory like that. Every November, we celebrate our fallen. It's not just World War I or World War II. It is more recent conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that there is too much careless talk from President Trump. He clearly doesn't know the history of what happened. I'm somebody who believes in NATO. It is a force for good in the world. We need a strong NATO. We mustn't have these sorts of throwaway remarks.
Did you hear what Donald War Dodger Trump has said about us now? Well, it's a good thing we stayed a little off the front line, weren't it? Because then I wouldn't have that one either, would I? It's a good thing my best mate stayed a little off the front line, because he would have fucking ended up in 3 pieces instead of 2, wouldn't he? It's a good thing we only stayed a little off the front line, because we only lost 457 troops. I'm so glad that when we went to Afghanistan, we stayed a little off the front line, because I've got imaginary PTSD and an imaginary fucking leg to go with it. It's a good thing we only stayed a little bit off the front line, because we only fucking had 2,000 people injured.
Oh, it's a bit dusty. I just wipe that off, because obviously when things get old, people forget what we've done, don't they?
And whilst you sit there with your stupid haircut and your orange face discrediting everything NATO has done for the US, have a look at these fucking statistics right here that you seem to have forgotten about.
Are the definition of courage and patriotism and professionalism and dedication, and they make so much sacrifice for our country, sometimes make the ultimate sacrifice. So I profoundly disagree with President Trump's comments. I think let's not forget that when the only time that Article 5, the collective defense clause of the NATO treaty, has been invoked was after 9/11, so that we could come and stand shoulder to shoulder with our American allies. And 450.
Unironically, Trump might be saving Starmer's career with his recent utterly random attack on British forces who served in Afghanistan. The guy who managed to dodge service in the Vietnam War because a doctor who was a close personal friend of his dad's gave him a diagnosis of bone spurs that exempted him that no one has ever seen. Suddenly decided that he wanted to attack the NATO troops who served in Afghanistan alongside the United States, claiming that they stayed off the front line. Blatantly untrue, because the best part of 500 British service personnel lost their lives in action. Which, whatever you may think of NATO going into Afghanistan, is a huge number of people to lose for a Western power going into modern warfare. Trump has put Starmer in a position where he has absolutely no choice but to attack back and call out Trump's behaviour. And just from my personal experience, it's got people I know personally who absolutely hate Keir Starmer's guts, and rightfully so, being like, you know what, for the first time ever, I'm on board with this guy. Yes, you and I, twin, we don't like Keir Starmer, but it is undeniable that this path of standing up to Trump that Trump has forced him to go down has made him look the toughest he's ever looked in his time as Prime Minister. The entire country is behind Starmer for the first time in his premiership. Trump, in his desperation to lash out and hurt people because he's a spiteful man-baby with no control over his emotions, Trump's desperation to lash out at the conduct of British troops is only going to hurt the far right in my country. It's only going to hurt Reform UK because they are so closely aligned with him. This is catastrophic for the likes of Nigel Farage that have stood by Trump through thick and thin. Now be standing by someone who is attacking British troops. Only we'd had this version of Keir Starmer when it came to handling Netanyahu. Honestly, rare Keir Starmer W, if only because his hand has been absolutely forced.
So that orange buffoon who won't be named said yesterday that no non-US NATO forces served on the front line in Afghanistan. And oh, what's this? Oh yeah, that's right. That's casualties from non-US forces in the war in Afghanistan who served on the front lines and died and got injured. Look, 2,000 people from the United Kingdom, 2,000 from Canada, thousands from across NATO, European countries, loads of people from Denmark who fought in Afghanistan. Denmark with the highest proportion of soldiers to casualties in the entire Afghan war of any NATO country. And now Don wants to take Greenland. So that just shows the respect he has. But yeah, they did serve, they did fight alongside their US counterparts, and they died alongside the US counterparts in pursuit of the war on terror.
So tracking some comments made that NATO troops stayed a little off the front lines in Afghanistan and that the US has never necessarily needed us. Well, it's a real shame to hear that. The only time NATO has ever enacted Article 5 was after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when the United States and the world rallied to the support of the US. Our agencies, our forces, our politicians, we all stood together, shoulder to shoulder, and responded. On Afghanistan, frankly, this is utterly ridiculous. Many courageous and honourable service personnel from many nations fought on the front line. Many fought way beyond it. I'd served 5 tours in Afghanistan. Many alongside my American colleagues. We shed blood, sweat and tears together. And not everybody came home. These are bonds, I think, forged in fire, protecting US or shared interests, but actually protecting democracy overall. And I'd suggest whoever believes these comments, come have a whiskey with me, my colleagues, their families, and importantly the families of those that have made the ultimate sacrifice for both of our nations. It's also worth reminding everyone here in World War II, more British troops landed on D-Day than any other nation. It was an allied response, and united we conquer. Now, some advice for anyone who may be listening. There are 2 great sayings worth remembering. Number 1, there is only one worse thing than working with allies. That is working without them. And when you do, always remember, never above, never below, always side by side.
I find them deeply disrespectful and insulting, and certainly I've spoken to a number of colleagues who served in Afghanistan, and indeed different people have different thoughts on them, but the resounding viewpoint on it is they're disrespectful, they're ridiculous, they're insulting, and ultimately they're not based in fact. I joined the Armed Forces in 2006 and spent a bit of time in England training, and then ultimately joined the 1st Battalion, the Royal Irish Regiment, and we later deployed to Afghanistan in 2008, and after roughly 4 months in theatre, in actual fact in a place within Helmand Province, Musakala, where American counterparts, American Marines, were actually serving, I was caught up in an IED blast, an improvised explosive device on the front line, and that unfortunately took off my right leg and badly damaged my left leg, which later had to be surgically amputated due to the severity of the infection and the wounds itself.
It must be difficult to be a European Trump supporter this week. First, he said he'll take EU land, Greenland, and then he downplayed NATO efforts in Afghanistan. You might be a true Trump supporter and say, yeah, so what? Trump does need Greenland for security, though you might struggle to agree with his mocking of NATO troops. But even allies of Trump in Europe have found his Greenland remarks difficult to stomach. Take Jordan Bardella, head of France's very right-wing National Rally party. He described Trump's threats to put tariffs on anyone defending Greenland as unacceptable. And Alice Weidel, co-leader of the AfD, a very right German party, said that Trump had violated his campaign promise not to interfere in other countries. The problem with being a pro-Trump ally in Europe is the marriage of the European right and the Trumpist policies is a mirage. You can't be a patriot of Europe and MAGA at the same time. Ultimately, you need to pick a side. On the face of it, Trump has given a lot of support to these parties, calling them patriots. He wants to see all of Europe dominated by parties like National Rally and AfD. You've heard it before. Make Europe great again. These parties often rally against mass migration, identity politics, reminiscing about better times in the past, and putting their country first. You can see why it's music to Trump's ears. But cracks start to show when you put these policies into practice, especially the last one, putting yourself first. Sure, one country can put itself first, but you can't all be first. It's either America first or your European country first. The National Rally in France have crafted an election message of France first. An official even said, even if we don't use the slogan, make France great again, that's what it's all about. So, Put France first, great. But you can't put Trump first and France first at the same time. Here is one of the biggest issues with being a party that follows the Trump line. They think it gives them more independence to their country, but they're just ditching old establishments like NATO and the EU for a new master. True, Bardella of France is a little more cautious. He told The Economist magazine that he likes the way Trump defends his country's interests, but that he does it in a way that is very American in style, a style that is not European and even less French. Over in the UK, Nigel Farage of the Reform Party struck a similar tone. He said, "We don't always agree with Trump, and this is one of those occasions." Other parties like the very right in Poland or Spain's Vox have taken a different approach. Just stay quiet and hope this all blows over soon. Indeed, Greenland has sort of blown over. But less to be said about Trump's recent remarks on NATO. In a recent interview, Trump was once again downplaying NATO. Nothing new there. He wanted to say the usual. We are bigger than NATO. Without Trump, NATO wouldn't exist. You've heard it before. But then he crossed a line for the right, and perhaps even the left in Europe. First, he said that he wasn't sure if NATO would ever be there for the US. This is a bit rich. Article 5 in NATO, an attack on one is an attack on all, has only ever been triggered once, and that was triggered by the US. The US called it back in 2001 for calls to go to Afghanistan. Trump then said that NATO troops didn't do much, that they stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. Words like this will sting, especially to those who lost troops in Afghanistan. One of Elon Musk's favourite British politicians, an independent, Rupert Lowe, described Trump's remarks as deeply offensive. The troops in Afghanistan were patriotic, he said, and while trying to maintain his admiration for Trump, even Lowe couldn't resist his horror. These comments were abhorrent, he said. In many ways, this does feel like a misstep for Trump. A man who once was very often able to read the room and deliver punchlines to his fan base that they loved. But there are growing cases where Trump seems to be offending even his own fans. Generally speaking, military personnel in the UK and the US tend to vote right-wing. Recent polling data from the last US election showed that 63% of veteran voters went for Trump. You usually hear more of military families on the right, and right-leaning governments often talk about more defence and spending for the military. It therefore feels absurd to downplay the actions of troops in the military who are often conservative, Trump's base. Trump will likely say that he was meaning to question NATO's reliability, but there will be no escaping from the explicit remarks that he made. He may need to correct them or, in typical Trump fashion, accuse us of misinterpreting him. He could always accuse mainstream media of misinterpreting him as well, but the comments are quite clear. I've watched them, you can watch them too. For MAGA Americans, this may not matter much anyway. Trump has stuck to his line, pushing everyone out of the way and putting Americans first. That's basically what he campaigned on. But for the Europeans who have backed him, they may now start to question where that leaves them.
You have to understand that Americans could not handle a war with NATO. So I want to invite you for these next 3 minutes to war game this out with me. And I'll explain what exactly you could expect if the United States were to invade Greenland and NATO's Article 5 pact was invoked. Immediately, you would see all of the borders close. That means the border with Canada. That means you're not going anywhere. The only place that you would have a chance to flee to would probably be a third world country. Now, in this moment, it might be a better option because you can expect attacks will unfold inside the United States. NATO countries are going to be hitting us inside of our borders. That is something Americans have not seen at scale in a long, long time. The markets would collapse. There would be a massive spike in the price of oil. There would be so much propaganda, even educated people like me would have a hard time discerning what's real. But if the propaganda ever gets off, more than likely, our lights would be shut off. Can you imagine how Americans would act if they couldn't get on Instagram and make videos like I'm doing right now? How many of you have ever dealt with that? How many of you have ever gone a week without a shower? Okay, it's one thing if you're the country that is bearing the brunt because you're fighting for your right to life and your right to sovereignty and your security. It's another thing entirely when you're the aggressor. Morale is a very tricky bitch. And an action of attacking a U.S. ally would almost surely fracture the military. You can expect at least 1/3 of them to defect. So you would have a real opposition inside of America. You would have a civil war on top of a global war. And don't even get me started about where you'll find your food, right? You think grocery stores are going to stay stocked during all this? I wish the American people would wake up enough to realize what this madman is leading us into. But like many people have said, maybe we need things to get this bad so we never let it happen again. Because the myth of this can never happen here is playing out in real time. I just can't believe that it is. We have all the historical references that we need, and people are still blind to it. But don't for a second think that the United States, at least not the United States military, but the United States citizenry, will be able to handle the amount of pain that will be inflicted upon them from a global conflict like this. We haven't seen it in a very long time, and we are definitely not fighting for anything other than our own selfish interest. So, it's going to be ugly, guys. I hope it doesn't happen.
Where were all of Trump's new besties when our former allies were fighting and dying alongside American soldiers in Afghanistan? I miss the Russian troops. And where were the Israelis? We've given them how much money and the IDF couldn't show up to help? And I guess it would have been awkward for the Saudis to send soldiers, seeing as 15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. But according to Trump, the countries that never helped were the countries that sent thousands of soldiers to fight, many of whom came home injured or in body bags, not because they were attacked, but rather because their ally, the United States, was. And what do our active duty military and veterans think about the fact that 1,160 of your non-American fellow brothers and sisters in arms never came home from Afghanistan? And while there was no front line in Afghanistan, the Brits led the Allied campaign in the Helmand province, Afghanistan's most violent and largest province. And Trump just dismisses that. As a reminder to anyone who thinks that allying with Trump or serving him will somehow get him to care about you or respect your sacrifice, this is how cheaply he discards anybody he thinks can't do anything for him anymore.
Listen, I am feeling very hopeless today. And it's not because of all the stuff that is going on in this country. I mean, it is. But I am feeling specifically extremely hopeless about us, about American citizens. As I can't see a way forward. And that is like, well, that's the end of the United States of America, right? If you really can't see a way, and I really can't. I watch this stuff happen in Minneapolis. I'm watching this stuff, like veterans being put in jail because they said something out, spoke out about this 5-year-old. Like all that stuff happens. It's not even just that too, because it's all the international stuff. You know, this doofus of a president is pulling us out of NATO by default, essentially, with all this Greenland crap. Yesterday, he pulled us out of the WHO. I don't know if anybody even noticed. Jared Kushner also, if you didn't even notice, has a whole, like, wealthy person's Epstein Island-ish plan that he's put in a really pretty slide deck that he pitched at the World Economic Forum, which this wealthy person's playground is going to be built on graves of displaced people. Like, all that stuff is going on, right? And the response from the American public is just black and white, like glaringly obvious. There are those of us that find all of that stuff that I just said problematic. Hello? And then we have these people over here who are one of two categories. Have no idea what's going on, or they're cheering for it. They are the Germans in the 30s. Like, yay, fascism, yay. And I don't even know which one of those is worse. I don't care enough to pay attention to any of this stuff, or I am actually gladly supportive of this absolute ridiculousness. just am so hopeless today because I don't know how to put those two. How do we put this back together? How? I literally do not know. Never mind Trump. He goes away. Let's pretend. What do we do? How are we ever going to fit back together?
Trump said NATO troops in Afghanistan stayed off the front lines. How insulting. There's some truth in that. That's absurd. For example, UK troops actually took the lead in Helmand, Afghanistan early in the war, which was one of the most dangerous provinces, and 453 UK soldiers died in Afghanistan, 158 Canadians, 86 French, among many others. The president's comments are so disturbing that the UK prime minister called them out, which doesn't happen very often, as this was an insult to the NATO troops who died to defend the free world in Afghanistan. Look, there were almost 3,500 coalition deaths in Afghanistan. Almost 2,400 were Americans, about 68%, and the UK, Canada, and France accounted for another 20%. But several NATO countries are small, but if you look at deaths per million, places like Denmark were right on par with the US. But still, and here's the president's point, many NATO countries pushed well below their weight, and several of them restricted their troops to lower risk missions only. So I don't think the president was calling out the UK. They were besides us damn right, but places like Germany, Italy, and Belgium had tight caveats, only deploying troops with strict contingencies to try to reduce their risk, while the US didn't have a damn choice to reduce our risk after almost 3,000 Americans died on 9/11. We took it a little more seriously. Well, it's also true for the initial phase of the Afghanistan war in 2001. NATO invoked Article 5 and was ready to help, but it was our choice to act unilaterally. We wanted maximum flexibility and control. It wasn't until 2003 that NATO took a bigger role, but they still operated separately, our choice still, so it makes perfect sense why more US troops would be put at risk. But even now, NATO's legal framework still allows for caveats. Each country individually gets to decide which actions they take, so that's why Trump is also reasonably questioning if the US were to get attacked today, would the NATO alliance back us up? Well, I think other countries are asking that about the US, and must I remind you, NATO's Article 5, which of course says an attack on one is an attack on all, has only ever been invoked for one country, the US, after 9/11, and NATO was there to help in whatever capacity we requested. Some countries were, others had caveats and did stay away from the front lines. That's all Trump was saying. I don't know if any place in Afghanistan was risk-free. I mean, even with caveats, Germany lost 54 troops, Italy 48, and Trump lumping his comment as all of NATO is disrespectful to every service member and their family worldwide who lost their life to defend America after 9/11. Just like most harsh things Trump says, there's some truth in it if you dive into it. Oh, great, you have to go on a deep-sea exploration to find some truth in the president's words. How long did you practice that one, buddy?